And I think one of the first persons that he used was this little doctor called Dr. Silkworth. When Dr. Silkworth was in medical school, he became very interested in we alcoholics. But when he got out of medical school, he learned, like most doctors did, it was very difficult to make a living working with alcoholics. Most doctors do not like to work with alcoholics. They said then and they say today that an alcoholic will not tell you the truth. That's certainly true, isn't it? And they said they will not do what we tell them to do. And that's certainly true, isn't it? But they said the main reason we don't want to work with them is they won't pay their bills.
I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're going to talk tonight about Joe and Charlie and how Joe and Charlie has enhanced our sobriety and how it could do the same thing for you. But first, I have a favor to ask. I would love for you to go check out our new website, SoberFriendsPod.com. Same great name, much faster website, streamlined. And I need you to do me a favor so that we can keep in contact with you and let you know all the good stuff we're doing. We have a mailing list now. Go ahead, put your name in, put your email address in, and we can email you once a week to tell you what's going to happen on the program and build a little back and forth. We don't sell your information. We respect your privacy. You can opt out if you want, but we just want to stay in contact. Steve's feeling better. John's here this week, and we're talking Joe and Charlie and how it's our annual thing. It's a perfect time to do this because first of the year are when people get together. And I think the first question to ask, John, who the hell are these Joe and Charlie guys?
Well, Joe and Charlie, I think we talked about it earlier. If you can go back to episode 9, we did a little discussion on who Joe and Charlie was. Back in the 70s, we have, Joe McHugh, which is Joe McQuaney, and then Charlie Parmalee. They were both, Southern gentlemen. They were both enthusiasts of the Big Book. They studied it. They read it. I think Charlie was known as Big Book Charlie because he was a real big book thumper. And then, they were hundreds of miles from each other, but in a roundabout sort of way, they kind of got introduced to each other that they may have some commonality between their knowledge of the Big Book, because both of them did extensive research on it and, finding out the little nuances and who the people were they were talking about, guys like Bill Dotson and Hank Parkhurst and Ebby Thatcher. They were putting names with these fictitious people in the Big Book, which made it, as they call it, Big Book Comes Alive. They made it come alive. So these guys got together in the mid 70s, I believe, and I think their very first they would go to groups and they would talk about it, and then they wanted to bring they were asked to bring this out to more people. So I think they did their first seminar in the early 80s, and it was short and sweet. It's nothing like the later issues of the Joe and Charlie Big Book studies. But it kind of evolved over the years, with these two guys. And then later on, Joe McHugh, he passed on, and then he was. Let me back up a little bit. Joe McHugh was starting to back out a little bit. He was getting old in age, and they brought in another guy, Joe McCoy. So they turned out to be Joe and Charlie, and there is a version of the tapes with all three guys. And it was one of the longer ones that we have done. We called it, Charlie Drunk Joe, because Joe McQuaney had a very, very deep Southern accent. But we'd have to go a couple of weeks before we before we could understand the dialect and be able to, hear the words and understand it. Where Joe McC, he was a publisher. That was he published books and things, so he was very well spoken.
So I would say that there's probably some people, depending on when you get into Joe and Charlie, that you have a Joe of your preference. I heard the second Joe first, so he's my Joe.
Right.
But if you started back in the day with this, the other Joe is your Joe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one with a there's a Wes Parker. There's another guy, I think he was from Canada. Wes joined them, and he did a couple of versions with Charlie. The other two Joes weren't around or weren't available, but Wes was a big book guy as well. How I got into it was my first experience was back in the mid 90s. It was about 1996 when it was a tape, one of the very first ones. It was eight cassette tapes, and you would play it.
Was it in like one of those book things you pull it apart and it's plastic?
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
exactly what it was.
Wow. Absolutely, and so we started doing some of those groups, and they weren't very long. It was like 8-10 weeks because it was 20 minutes aside for the tape, and then we having some local big book meetings start taking that on and reviewing the tapes. I did it once, maybe twice back then. I really didn't get into it until my current sponsor. He's been doing it for 32, 33 years, and I started going over when I asked him to be my sponsor back many, many moons ago. I went over to his house, and that first year and then the second year. But I was always hearing, these groups are small, these groups are intimate, and there's a whole bunch of people that want to get involved, and there's just not enough room in Dave's house. So the thought came across my mind, there's a definite need for people that want to learn about this stuff. So I started one of my own, and I think I've been doing it for 12 or 13 years myself. And I know Steve and Vinny had done one before, once or twice. Trying to branch off, and there's a couple. I think Tom out in Manchester's doing one, but there's
that would be a good one.
Yeah, there's a handful now in the area, and basically it all came from Dave B's. He's kind of brought this thing into local, and in our area, that's where we get it. But it typically starts that first week of January because we're starting a new year. It's not a New Year's resolution. It's just, it's a perfect time. It's the winter. There's not much else to do. So it's the perfect time to get in, to make this commitment, 16 weeks, and get involved in these groups. And I kind of, my group is very similar to what he was doing. I put my own little flair in it, just like everybody else. They put their own little spin, but the core is to go through the tapes, week by week. You sit around, you listen to 45 to 50 minutes of tape, you take a break, and then everybody in the room talks. You stay there until everybody has something to say. We don't just cut it off at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. It's just something that we've done every year, and it's it really helps to get into the big book, to get the knowledge, to get the history, and really find out what it means and what all these steps are, how they came about, and really how to do them. They teach you stuff like identify rather than compare. They talk about what the doctor's opinion really meant, what Dr. Silkworth was really trying to convey. Carl Jung, what was his part in this? Roland Hazard, what was his part in this? Ebby Thatcher, how did these guys bring this all together? And they really did make the big book come alive.
Yeah, I think the thing that I really like about this as well that you didn't hit upon is that what they do is they bring in a lot of humor. So if you're listening to this thinking we're listening to like two scholars talking about the big book, that's not what it is. You're learning a lot. And the humor is so corny, full of dad jokes, but there's a lot of humor and they bring it alive where it makes this interesting that I could see these two guys like up on stage at these seminars that they used to go to, and it feels like you're listening to a few friends. In a sense, these two guys were doing really the first recovery podcast. They just were doing it live.
Yeah. These are two old Southern boys, Southern guys, just normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill guys, and they entertained you. and that's how they taught. If you keep the person's attention with humor, with anecdotal information, and you make it you make it interesting, you bring pieces of history into it, it grabs your attention and it keeps you, and it locks you in. I've done a lot of these things, and every time I do the tapes, I hear something different. It's just like the big book. You're at a meeting one day and you're going through and you're reading the big book or the step book, and all of a sudden something pops out. It's like, well, I never saw that before, because you weren't in this time and space at this time, and that little phrase meant something to you. Happens almost every week at a Joe and Charlie Big Book. There's so much growth potential out of these things, and you learn so much.
Steve, what makes you do these Joe and Charlies? What do you get out of it?
Well, first of all, a couple things I want to touch base on here. For anybody who might be new, maybe not part of AA or just a little bit associated with AA, and still may not have an idea of what Joe and Charlie are. Basically, they take you through the first 164 pages of the Big Book, right? And just as it was said here, they take you through with some humor and some insight. It's their insight, but they take you through with their insight of how they feel it was put together. And I'll tell you, I do it because, just like John said, I do it for a couple of reasons now. One is I do it, the first time I did it, just to backtrack, I did it at John's sponsor's house, right? Dave's. That was the first time. I remember people talking about it when I came back after my relapse, and it was like, man, I wanted to do that. And I remember asking Dave, and Dave, it was a popular place. It was hard to get a seat in Dave's house, Right. And I remember, this was before I knew you, John, and I remember, so I asked him, he said to me, he's like, listen, I don't have any room. I'm like, okay, if something pops up, and like it does, something popped up, and he invited me over, and I did it with him for 2 years, and for me, it was just about getting into that big book. All right, the big book is my textbook of my sobriety. Right, it's not for everybody, but it is for me. It's how I got sober. It's how I continue to stay sober, is by constantly doing work that's laid out in front of me in that big book. So this gave me a chance to study that. We talk about the big book as being a text rather than a reading book. And if it's a text, just like anything else in school, you study that text. So basically, it becomes a study group to help me understand. So when I go through my big book now, there are years of notes in there from Joe and Charlie. Right. Yep. That like, oh, this is what it meant. Oh, like one of my favorite ones. And I remember they said is you can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. Right. And I have that written in my big book. And I realized, like, when I came in here, my mind was sick, and I couldn't heal. I couldn't fix myself. So I needed help. It's that type of insight, right? It's that type of, like, the light bulb goes off, like, oh, wait a minute. I can't fix this by myself. I need help to fix this, So that's what it was. It was all of those things. And then, this day and age, like, I haven't done it with you guys in a couple of years. Like I said, Vinny and I tried to branch off and and we had one going, and that was when COVID hit, right? Right. And we had it going, and it was going well, and then COVID hit, and we had to finish up on Zoom, and it was weird, and then obviously it didn't happen, and then we didn't have one. I feel like it's been a long time since I've done a Joe and Charlie. We did that one, so the first year, mine was the same thing. We finished up on Zoom. The following year, we did a complete Zoom one, but it was the first edition, and it was only 8 weeks. But it was, we still wanted to keep it going. Right. It really... We had gone through so many of the longer versions that it was just a taste and was a tease. and I've thought about branching off. As a matter of fact, my wife I told my wife a couple of weeks ago, like, hey, I just want to remind you and let you know that I'm doing a Joe and Charlie this year up at John's. And I said, it's a long way to, it's a good drive for me. It makes it a full night for me. And she said, why don't you do one here? And I said, you know something? I've thought about it many times. But I will tell you one thing, is I miss the guys that go to your house, right? Oh, I don't see you guys as much. I see Matt on Monday night most of the times, but I very seldomly now see you, John, at a meeting because we just don't go to the same meetings. So it's like, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys and reconnecting with you guys. And that's the biggest draw. And I wouldn't even call it fellowship. It's that
bond that
Yeah.
we all get together. You know, it's Timmy's not joining us. It's a bummer. He was always always had great things to say, but you know, it's that camaraderie.
All those things that Tim didn't like.
Yeah, that he
was
does.
sure to share that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Listen, it's where I met Timmy. I tell the story all the time. Like, I remember that, and it's like, I remember the first couple, I don't know, at least the first year. Like, who is this guy, man? It's like, really, because I didn't know him. I didn't know him at all.
I've known him for 8 years, and I still say that.
But I could not figure him out. And it's like, and then finally, after, I think it was like, after the second year he was there, towards the end, I was like, oh, I'm starting to get this guy. I'm starting to figure out what's going on. But it's that kind of stuff. So you're able to make those type of relationships, which again, to me are very important. You know, I do some social media stuff, and there's a lot of people out there nowadays. There's a lot of people who are trying to create their own communities. And I've jumped on that, and I tell them, like, find your community. You know, whatever it is, find it and then hang on to it, because most of us need some type of help to fix this problem.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, it's AA, it's studying the big book. It might not be for everybody, but it is for me, and I know it's for you guys too. So that's why I do it. I just do it. And especially lately, I feel a little bit disconnected because of everything. You know, even because of COVID, the meetings have changed, stuff like that. It's like, I'm hopeful that, you know, this will kick back some of that stuff. It's just, I always find that my program starts to get so much stronger when I do this. Like I said, we meet for a couple hours on a middle of the week in the winter when it's cold and dark out there, and when we finish, it's starting to get light out. I know that I'm always itchy to finish when we finish because it's starting to get nice out. Spring is coming. Yep. And it's just a nice way to do it.
One of my favorite passages on the Joe and Charlie is when it's Joe McSee. It's one of the later versions. When we get into step 6. So, you know, he goes, you know, we do the step 4 inventory. We write everything down. We go through the step 5. And then after we completed sharing our 4th step with this person, we're supposed to find a quiet place, take down this volume referring to the big book, and read through the first 5 proposals. And we're supposed to go over our inventory to see what we did and if we left anything out and if our work was sound. And then we get into step 6. And way Joe explains it, step 6 is, I seen what I have become. And that statement right there was just so powerful, because step 6 and 7 in the big book, it's a paragraph each, and it's something that you do with your higher power. It's a one-on-one thing, but it's still good to talk with it to your sponsor or whoever you're doing this process with. But that is what step 6 is all about. I saw what I had become, and it became objectionable to me. And I used, when we're talking about the steps, we get to step 6. I use that all the time. I saw what I become because I did, and it made such a big impact. The way I do the groups is different from they're similar, but they're different. We start at 6. No, we start at 7 o'clock. We go for 45, 50 minutes. We have a 10-minute break. My wife usually makes some snack, some brownie or cake or whatever.
Some great confections. Enough to give you diabetes.
Yeah, and we have coffee, and then we finish up. And then halfway through, so on week 8, that is potluck night. So instead of starting at 7, we start at 6, and everybody brings a dish in, and we have a little bit of a get together at, before the meeting, and everybody has a little nosh, and we sit there and we enjoy each other's company, and then, we get down to business.
I usually eat to the point of throwing up, so I eat alcoholically that week. Usually there's some great food.
Yeah, oh yeah. And then when we finish up, and we've done this the last couple of times we did the group. The first time we did this, we did field trips afterwards. So we do the 16 weeks. And the first time we went up to Albany to visit Ebby Thatcher's gravesite. And we had a meeting at the grave. We went out and had, it was 8 or 10 of us. It was in the spring, so it was cool but warm at the same time. We went into town, had something to eat, and then we went to a meeting. And it was a lunchtime meeting. It was an open topic. And we told everybody while we were there. They thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And it wasn't the best neighborhood in town, but perfectly safe there. And then I think the following year we went down to New York City, went to the World Services office, and that was very informative. You get to talk to everybody there, but we try to hold on to the group just a little bit longer and kind of enjoy the bond that we made with each other, because it's so much different than a regular meeting. You see these guys for 16 weeks straight for 2 hours every week. Some magic happens. And it changes things.
Yeah, you have a bond with people when you've done a Joe and Charlie with them. So if you're looking for the Gene McCarthy reason of, I just want some fellowship, I need to have a network of people more than anything else, you're going to get that at a Joe and Charlie. And everyone is different, because we're talking about this. There's no real format with a Joe and Charlie. There's not like, AA World Services sends you a fax and this is how you do it. It's AA from 1939 in a lot of ways. It's like it's AA sitting in Bill's living room where we're meeting off the grid, going through this book, which can be difficult to digest if you do it on your own, even if you go to a big book meeting and you have people who are experts who break it down in an enjoyable way, and then we can share with each other. And you share things you probably wouldn't share in a meeting because you have this close bond with the people there.
So Matt, if you go back in your memory, was it your first year anniversary, or was it year two that my wife made? My wife made you a nice cake.
Yeah. Boobies. Big old booby cake.
A booby cake?
Yeah. With nipples in the middle.
That's my mare.
Well, the
milk
nice
chocolate frosting.
The nice thing, milk chocolate frosting. I don't know what that says about you, Matt. The nice thing about this is it's a small group. Like I said, 7 to 9 guys by the time you get through, right? So, you want to keep it around that size just for the length of the meeting and all. Because like you said, we do want to share. Everybody gets a chance to share. So if you listen to, you just do the logistics of it, 45 minutes or 50 minutes of tape, a little bit of break, everybody share. If everybody shares for 5 minutes or 6 minutes, right, you're at an hour. So,
right.
But what happens is, you can bring stuff to a meeting like this that is way more intimate than you would at an open meeting, right?
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit, it's not quite a sponsor, but it's somewhat like that, right? You can bring it, you could leave it there, you could talk about stuff that maybe you won't talk about in a big open meeting. And then what happens is when you start revealing those things about yourself, it's that whole thing of once you start shining a light on stuff. This is I mean this honestly. This is one of the things where I fell in love with Timmy, because once we started talking, I realized that as much as Timmy and I are very different, there's so much of us that are both the two of us that's the same. And I started to realize, oh, look at this guy who, like I said, I couldn't understand who he was. And I started to realize, oh, no, this guy, we're alike in a lot of ways. So Timmy and I have that relationship now. We have that relationship like, oh, yeah. When I talk about being crazy in my head, Timmy just looks at me. He goes, yeah, I know what that means. Right? I know exactly what that means. So it's those type of things that you can make that relationship that typically you don't get in a big meeting with 20 or 30 or 40 other people, and again, those are the things that for me, I've tried to bring some of my sponsees. I've always brought my sponsees. If I'm working with somebody during this time, they come to that meeting with me.
Right.
Like I always, right? Like I got a sponsee. I always tell John, hey, I want this person to come. I want a seat, if we can. Again, sometimes you can't do it. But I always tell them, like, you got to come, you got to be committed, and you got to do this, because to me, it's that important.
Yeah, you did that a couple of times.
Yeah, I did a couple of times, right?
Now I'm trying to oh, you got the cake there.
Oh, you got the cake picture.
If you want to zip that over, if you're okay with that, I can put that on the that on the artwork. We can embed that. Or an Instagram post, one or the other.
Whatever.
I think this is one of the keys here is vulnerability.
Yeah.
That for me to stay sober, and I say stay sober, it's not the absence of alcohol. It's
right.
I don't need alcohol because I can deal with life's problems and be happy with the tools I have. vulnerability is really important, to be vulnerable with other people and to express my feelings in a coherent way, or maybe not even coherent, but have a place where I can express this stuff. What I also love about it is it speaks to the scholar in me. I finished reading William Shaberg's book, Writing the Big Book. I will tell you, if I had not gone through multiple Joe and Charlies, that book would have been a hell of a lot harder.
Yeah.
Because this is like Joe and Charlie for that book is the Cliff Notes. And then the book is like almost like the source material that they would have pulled from.
Right.
And you can like, okay, I know this person. Okay, I know this person. Oh, they never talked about Hank Parkhurst. Who is this guy? And when you know this, it makes for a better experience when you go to other meetings, because then you can teach other people. I will say, if you know people are in a meeting who have gone through Joe and Charlie, sit next to them, because you're going to get a lesson or a flavor of recovery, which is probably going to be pretty solid, because these are people who know what they're talking about. And the people who go to Joe and Charlie's, that's almost like sponsorship academy. It's academy for starting up other meetings or for being the point person.
It's funny you say that, because now that, since I've been doing this, when I bring a sponsee through the book, I'm basically doing a Joe and Charlie Big Book study, because like Steve said earlier, my book is full of highlights and notes and phrases and all kinds of stuff that when I go through, I explain each and every page, and I tell them all the notes that I have in there to try to express, give them as much knowledge as I can, so that when they're going through it the first time, they kind of understand it. They have a better chance of understanding what it means, because my first time through the book, it meant zero to me.
It's tough to absorb the first time through.
Right, because I compared every step of the way. I'm not that bad.
Bill is not a great writer. Don't let anybody fool you. It is. There are challenges. This is an amateur writer who wrote this book. It became the Bible, but that's not the way it started. It started with a couple of amateurs putting this thing together that then became something. And there's a lot of terms like whoopee parties in there, which is 1939 vernacular, which is tough to digest today. Yeah. You need a hand getting through that and pulling the great stuff out of that book.
Whirling dervish.
You really do. You need, especially in 2022, going on to 2023, you do need some help in going through that stuff. Most of us do, because there is so much of that 1930s language in there that you can get lost in it and you can dismiss it. Listen, we talk about it all the time, and it's one thing nice about having a big book meeting too, like our Monday night meeting, is that we go through, we read this book over and over and over and over and over again. So I've been going to that meeting for probably the last 8 or 9 years, and regularly. So I've gone through that book multiple times, and you get a chance to go through there and talk about it, and then you get a chance to sit there and listen to other people's thoughts and opinions and ideas and interpretations, right? With these books, we interpret them. And it just helps you understand them better. And if you don't watch out, there's some chapters in there we talk about it, to the wives, and making sure Papa's taken care of over here, right? Don't put too much shit on his plate. You may push him out. He may drink again. And you start looking at some of that stuff in today, and you go, well, I'm not sure it fits. But the Joe and Charlie's, the small groups, the big books, they all help you work through that stuff. And help you get a better understanding of how it fits into your life. That's what it is, how it fits into your life. It fits into my life quite well.
They at least bring the vernacular into 1987, which is close enough.
Yeah, you're right.
And talking about those chapters, like to wives, that can be really off-putting to people. Right. There's a lot of women I've run into that they hold their nose when they get to wives. And a lot of Bill's intent was, I really don't care if I piss you off. I am willing to sacrifice your feelings to make sure that the sick and suffering alcoholic has a way to be free of alcohol. So that's why you end up with, live and let live, Let Father have his smokes. Let Father have his coffee. Don't bother him. If it gets too heated, well, this is getting serious. I should walk away. Because at the time, he was just singularly focused on nothing matters than staying sober.
Right.
So there's some like shortcuts around the edge of some behaviors that he was willing to accept to make sure that you stayed sober. But man, that to wives, I can think of one woman in that big book meeting that it pisses her off every single time we get to that chapter.
Every week. If she's going to take a week off, that's the week she's taking off.
Yep.
Yeah, it's that single, you're right. And this is the whole point. That's with the Joe and Charlie helping us understand all this stuff. But, there's a singleness of purpose in the AA that Bill brought forth, which you were just talking about, Matt. It's a singleness of purpose to make sure that everything is done to help the alcoholic solve his alcohol problem. Because it comes down to this, and we understand it, I understand it, I know I understand it completely, that unless my alcohol problem is fixed, nothing else in my life can be fixed.
Right.
And that's how it is for me. Nothing else can be fixed until I address my alcohol problem. Bill understood that. Like, you got to take care of that problem first, and then maybe somewhere down the road you could worry about the cigarettes or the coffee or the other stuff. But at that time, nothing else matters. And there's a lot to be put into that. There's a lot, and I buy into that. And I'll just as a sidebar, we're having a little bit of problem with the church for our Friday night meeting that we've been pushed out twice in the month of December. We haven't been able to have our meeting. And that's bad enough for us as a group not to be able to have our meeting. But here's what bothers me, is that we can't get the word out that there's no meeting, right? There's no way. There's no bulletin board to say, hey, on Friday, December 16th, there's no meeting at this church. So people are going to show up who don't know. The people who come every once in a while, or maybe there's a newcomer coming who needs a meeting, and he's going to show up and there's not going to be a meeting. And we're not going to be there to perform our primary purpose. Right. And that has irritated me, and that's something I'm going to bring up. Like, listen, this is important, guys. We have to have a meeting. And if this church doesn't understand how important this is to us, then maybe we're in the wrong location. Like, we need to be able to have a meeting somewhere on this property, so if somebody shows up, we have a meeting for that person.
Right. It's tough during the wintertime. Otherwise, you could have it outside.
I agree. And again, that's sort of off topic, but it comes down to that primary purpose of what we do here. It's what we do on this podcast, right? It's what we talk about it all the time. We are here for the still sick and suffering, for the sober curious, for whoever, newcomers, old timers, whatever. But we want to make sure that if somebody needs to listen to something about sobriety, that this is a choice for them. This is an option for them to be able to listen to this for a half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it might be, and maybe they'll find something in there that'll be helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The church might just not be the right night for that meeting. That you might.
I agree.
It seems to work on Monday. Just might not be lined up right.
Yeah, Monday that church is closed. Right? A lot of churches, they're closed on Mondays because of everything happens on Sunday. Right. So the offices are closed. Everything's closed. That was the way it was with my church. Right? Everything was closed on Monday. So Monday's never a problem. But Friday is. But again, I don't want to get off into that topic. It's just something that, I was thinking about, and it's, when you talking about Bill being totally focused on the alcoholic got me thinking about it.
Yeah, to the point that his stories later on, he took some liberties with the stories later in life, because if I tighten it up and I make the story a little prettier than it really was,
right,
it fits a lot better for somebody to identify.
Right.
Not because I'm trying to lie. No, I'm gonna take creative liberties on what actually happened, because this will attract the alcoholic a little bit more and give them some hope. And he was singularly focused on that.
Yeah.
Right or wrong.
I agree.
Yep, absolutely.
If you have a chance to get involved, whether you're an AA person or not, I would recommend that you do some type of Joe and Charlie. I am curious, if you're out there, tell us, what's your experience been with Joe and Charlie? You can reach out via email, matt@soberfriendspod.com. I have an ask for you. Go to our new website, soberfriendspod.com. It loads super fast. It's sleek. It looks beautiful. And join our mailing list I'd love to have that conversation so we can let you know ahead of time what we're going to do so that we can stay in touch. And, you haven't given us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts in a long time. What's up with that? Give us a 5-star review. Tell everybody how great this show is. If you're on Spotify, press the 5 stars and give us a rating. Well, Steve and John, it's almost time for our Joe and Charlie as it's the start of the new year.
2 weeks.
Happy New Year to you both.
Happy New Year. We're recording this show a few days before Christmas, the weekend, the Wednesday before Christmas. So you'll be hearing it after Christmas. But
you're teaching them all the magic.
Yeah, it's okay.
But
Merry Christmas to you guys, and Merry Christmas to everybody out there, or Happy Hanukkah, or if that's what you celebrate, or whatever you may celebrate out there. And enjoy the holidays.
No, happy holidays.
Happy holidays, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/SoberFriendsPod.